Hi there, welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. In this podcast, I interview successful business leaders and industry experts to help you grow your business. I truly believe that sometimes single insight can completely change your business directions and allow you to achieve your business goals. In this episode, my guest is a keynote speaker. She's a consultant and she's a corporate trainer. She's also an author of 2 books. Her first book is the Handy Communication Answer book, and the second book is Unmute: How to Master Virtual Communication and Reclaim Your Sanity. She's been also teaching business communication at University of Alberta and Concordia University of Edmonton. She's also been a guest speaker at various radio and TV programs, both in the US and in Canada. We had a discussion around the various topics on business, leadership, and communication. And Lauren shared her insights how hybrid environments here to stay and what business leaders are doing to retool their post-pandemic workspaces to accommodate both hybrid and remote environment communication. She also shared insights on what kind of challenges that business leaders are dealing with, and she shared a lot of tips from her book as well. What can you do to overcome some of those challenges? So if you like these the videos and the messages, don't forget to send us your feedback. Until next time, please welcome Lauren Sergy. I guess welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. Today my guest is someone very special, Lauren Sergy. Lauren, the area is your expertise. Hopefully I pronounced your name right? It's a surgery, right? Okay, beautiful. So it's the area of your expertise, Lauren, the communication, and it just gets so important over the last few years, what we just gone through. So I'm looking forward to our discussion, looking forward to learning from you. Thank you so much for time today.
Thank you so much for bringing me on. It's a real pleasure.
You're welcome. So walk us through, what do you see the changes in that communication? We've gone through from a totally in-person to digital over the last few years. Where you saw some of the biggest challenges, where you saw some of the biggest changes from your client and how you've been helping out?
Well, the biggest change I saw is that basically everyone who was holding off on going virtual had no choice, and they all went virtual. But that was a really remarkable change for many businesses because prior to the pandemic, I had been working virtually with clients for years. And prior to the pandemic, the organizations that were holding out were typically very large companies who dealt in the financial sector predominantly, or who dealt in engineering. And the primary reason that the primary excuse, I will call it, for that is what it was, that I heard was that there were security concerns with them doing anything. Meetings could not happen virtually. There were too many security concerns with the information being shared. So that was, I believe, used more as a reason to keep people in the office, because there was a concern that if everyone went virtual, that work would stop.
Yeah.
A totally unfounded concern. So when the shift happened, it was especially difficult for those companies, as the security issues did mean that they needed to jump through more regulatory hoops in order to go virtual than many other companies did. For plenty of companies, it was, can you find a webcam? Because there are none to be had. They've all been bought. And can you figure out how to log into Zoom? Which is not difficult to figure out. But like I said, those other companies, they had to go through a lot of regulatory approvals. And I think that set them up for an extremely stressful experience with virtual. So they were coming into it already kind of primed to find it very stressful. So that was interesting. And then when people did come online, there was this period of thrashing where I don't want to say no one knew what to do, but it sure felt that way. So I would have clients saying, hey, can you come on to tell my staff that it's inappropriate for them to be showing up to senior management meetings in their hoodies? Wow. And broadcasting from their beds. So there was this extraordinary lack of awareness about the etiquette that is involved in operating in this environment. That's not a problem anymore. People understand you should be wearing pants and you should be in a reasonably professional environment. Right? That's fine. But where we still find a lot of difficulty is that this medium is not the same as in person. You can't behave the same way on camera as you can in person because it messes up our communication signals and our communication cues. And I'm talking really basic instinctual things like the way our body orients. If we're sitting around a boardroom table and we want someone to speak, we turn to face them. And that tells everyone around the table whose turn it is next. That can't happen on camera. So many people are still relearning how to communicate in this medium, and it's not intuitive. We did not come out of the womb understanding how to be on camera. I might say differently for Gen Z as they come harder into the workforce, but this does take some practice and some awareness and some thought, because it isn't an intuitive medium for most people.
But to your point, that's a very interesting point. But to your point, it's gonna stay. It's not going away. So you rather, only choice is you better good at, work on your skill set and get better at it. Because it's here to stay. Yeah. And one of the items I noticed that in a person, when we were talking in a boardrooms, that what you say, it just stays in the memories, or who says what, right? So, but at this medium, it stays there permanently. If you record a discussion, it's there for forever. So you just want to be mindful that wherever the discussions happening with the teams or with the vendors or with whoever's with the corporate world, you want to make sure that you do your due diligence before you get into discussions.
Absolutely. You want to be using this medium with intention. Like what are we talking about? You have the usual meeting things prepared, but then you do need to think about, okay, what nonverbal message am I sending? What impression do I want people to give? What sort of tone and tenor do I want this meeting to have? Does it need to be on camera or not? Because this is stressful. This puts a lot of load on our brain. We're dealing with looking at cameras where there's faces all over the screens. We've got multiple screens open. So it is a very, what I call cognitively heavy mode of communication, and that makes it tiring. So the question of, should this be on camera or not, is a really important one. And that's not stuff that we necessarily think about. If it's an in-person meeting, you show up. And you're presumably dressed for the office because that's where you are.
How about from business leadership standpoint, Lauren? We have to manage people. We have to build those relationships with the staff as well. And not only communication is the one part, but other part is building that rapport, building that relationship with your own team and cross-functional teams, right? So what is the creates a challenge for, in person, when we are in the same room, it's very easy to build a rapport relationship. You get to see a lot of body language and you get to see, have a back and forth. You can do back and forth here as well, but it's not as personal as you were in the same room. So what are the challenges building those key relationships with the employees or with other teams?
That's such a good question, particularly for leaders, because strictly speaking, this is all communication etiquette, basically. The higher up the ladder you are, the more you can get away with.
You can get away with, okay.
You can get away with more the higher up the ladder you are, because you set the tone. So someone who is, an entry level or early management, that sort of thing, they're going to be much more aware of putting on a good show than the CEO necessarily is. And I'm not slamming that. That's fine. That's one of the perks of being the boss, right?
Yeah.
But on camera, the communication cues are different. So what I run into are senior leaders who they've got their professional persona on, they've got their look put together, they're very put together, but they haven't needed to be so aware of the impression they give when they're communicating for years, because they're used to it now. But then you put them in a totally different environment, and now they need to bring that self-awareness back. And I find it doesn't take long. They understand the purpose of this very quickly, but it is a matter of bringing that self-awareness back and then saying, okay, I am here to connect with the team. This means I need to be very conscious of where my eyes are pointed, because they need to feel like I am looking at them. So I can't be looking at the documents. I can't be looking at the other screen. I can't even be looking at them. I need to be looking at my camera lens.
Got you.
And that's a hard habit to form if you're not.
Yeah, no, I struggle with that sometimes as well. I'm looking at the camera. I'm looking at, either, yeah.
Well, you have to toggle back and forth.
Yeah.
And let me be clear here. in normal conversation, we look around ourselves too. We don't just stare relentlessly at the camera, right? Like at each other like this. That would get weird.
Yeah.
So it's okay to look away from time to time. But if what the leader is trying to do is connect, they have to have that in their mind and say, okay, much of my time is going to be spent with my eyes focused on the camera lens. I need to learn how to look relaxed on camera, which often involves learning how to gesture so that people can see you move. Otherwise, it's just a cut off head, and it becomes very, very stiff, very formal, very disconnected. So these, again, for leaders, these are skills they have to learn fresh, and they're likely the sort of communication skills that they haven't thought about for many years. So
and they can get away with a lot, but also it brings a responsibility as well, right? So if you're setting up a tone in your company, you better be top of your skill set, because if you're not setting up a tone right, who's going to follow, right? So it does bring a lot of responsibility. Make sure that if you're not following all that protocols, then who else can do that?
And here's some pressure that gets put onto the people at the top level. They need to look competent in this medium. They need to look competent on camera. So of course, it's important for our leaders to be competent in their jobs. That's part of the show, right? You need to demonstrate that you're good at what you do. And this isn't something that they ever had to be good at before. Yeah. But once you start to look like you don't know how it works, you're fumbling, your camera is angled so that you can only really see an eyeball in the top corner of the head like that. When you look awkward and you come across as uncomfortable in the space, that, and it's a very subtle, very subconscious effect that it has on people, but that makes them start to infer that lack of competence into other areas of your work.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of pressure to put on someone.
Yeah, it's just different skill set. When we, olden days, when before COVID, not very long ago, when we managed teams, let's say this large team, we sat in a boardroom, easy to communicate with the audience, right? So now you're communicating in this. It's a different. You still need to get the same message across, but you're not getting as much feedback from people right in front of the camera, and you don't know what's going on with other people. People could be sitting there. There could be some family members. People have a, personal life goes on. There's so much goes on, and you're trying to manage the people through this channel. So definitely you need a different skill set to get hold on everybody's attention.
Yes, you do. And behaving naturally on camera means doing a lot of unnatural things. Again, like being aware of where your hands are, being aware of where the camera is, being able to ignore the laundry machine that has started up its little cheerful chime in the background because it's finished. And now part of your brain is going, you don't want to pay attention to that. So it's a stressful communication environment. And I do recommend that people use it with a light hand. Virtual meetings are wonderful. At least 50% of my business has always been virtual. But really ask yourself, is this meeting necessary? And if it is, does it have to happen with the cameras on? How are people doing? Do we need to connect? Do we need to see each other's faces? Is that important right now? Is that going to help people focus? Or is it Thursday or Friday afternoon? Everyone is tired. It's been a rough week. And the last thing we want to do right now is have to, be on, put on a show for the camera. If that's the case, maybe invite everyone to turn their cameras off.
Yeah.
Take a load off. It's okay. Yeah. You can do that.
Yeah. Where I find it challenging, Lauren, is when I'm recruiting, I go through a lot of young people, they no hesitation coming on a camera, but that's where it's a lot of pressure on you because you don't want to make a mistake. And sometimes it does not, you're not able to filter all the skills that you need to filter on a Zoom, Zoom meetings. So in person, it's much easier to do that. I find a lot of people, I talk to some, colleagues of mine, we all struggle in that area that, you want to make sure that you're not making a mistake because we know how expensive those mistakes are every time you make a wrong judgment on somebody's skill set. But it's very hard to evaluate all the skill set on a Zoom call, definitely in person, it's much easier.
It is much easier. Although I do think that there's an element of learning the etiquette in all settings. And etiquette sounds like such a fussy word, But really, it's about norms of behavior and what is considered polite behavior. And it's about sending the right message. So with many people who are entering into the workforce, especially those young recruits fresh out of university or post-secondary or wherever they're coming in from, the younger recruits, they haven't necessarily gotten that exposure to business etiquette, whether it's virtual or in person, that helps them make good judgments as to how to be around other people. So I find that they're very aware of how to look good on camera. They've been doing that since they were young teenagers. They know that. But do they know, again, where I keep picking on the eye contact thing because it's an easy thing to point out. But do they know how their background should look? Have they considered that as being part of the message? Are they aware of when to respond and how to respond and what to call other people? And where we run into problems with in-person etiquette, devices. Those are really problematic. And it's not just the young folk, although they are more likely to put, as soon as the conversation goes away from them or they feel like they'd have nothing to contribute, to go on and try to do something else, not so much in interviews, but in general business meetings. But I see that a lot at the leadership level as well. So there's these things that have crept into our lives, and it disrupts our communication because, again, we're not sure how to be around other people. That helps the conversation, that helps them feel comfortable, and that increases the productivity. And this is something that I believe should be taught in high school. It needs to be taught, but at the very least, should be involved in business schools. I think that business schools should put this into their curriculum planning. And what would be really wonderful is if organizations and businesses made this kind of expectation setting or kind of culture training part of their onboarding of the new people. Because then they know how to act, they know what's expected of them. Takes a load off of the shoulders of the new person in terms of what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to be? And it sets a tone across the entire company that just has everyone communicating together in a similar way. It makes it easier.
Yeah, I'll wait for that day. But we struggle. We got to train these people when we hire them, right? But your point is well taken. Very interesting point you made that, something you don't do in a person, don't do on a digital, on a Zoom, or something you don't do in a Zoom, don't do it. So if we're having a meeting in a boardroom, and we always say, don't go on a phone, don't check your emails, right? But people do that on a Zoom when they're in a Zoom call, right? So if it's something that you're not doing in a person, why would you do that on a Zoom meeting?
Gurmeet, they do it in person too.
No, they do.
It's in person too. And it floors me. I'm like, no, put it away. The number of board meetings that I've sat in where half of them have their phones out.
Wow. Can be that urgent that you can't have a quick meeting with somebody. So where we start, we got to train people. So how does business leaders who are trying to improve not only their communication, also for the team's communication, where do they start? How do they go about it? How do you start building? If you decided, hey, listen, I want to make sure my communication, not only internally, but also to my customer as well, because you're building a culture end of the day, whatever you do internally is going to happen externally. So where do they start, and how do they go about start improving some of those communications?
Well, part of it, I think, does involve in people understanding what message they want to be sending about themselves as a professional. That's a really good place to start, because that's also very individual. Do you want to be, is your best way of being very stoic, very calm, very measured, very even keeled? You don't show a whole lot. Or are you more emotive, high energy, and that's what you want to get across? Once you understand those bits about yourself that you want to get across, it's almost like you're putting boundaries on an area that you're going to work within. And then beyond that, you start paying attention to yourself and saying, am I sending that message through the way that I dress, through the rate at which I speak, through the sorts of words that I choose to use? You have to develop either hyper self-awareness, or get someone on your side to help say, hey, you use that word again. Don't.
Yeah.
You're saying like every 5 words. You're starting every sentence with so. I know you don't want to do that. So you did it again. You did it again. And you have someone help you figure out what this is so that you can make the corrections. And many people will kind of balk at that because developing this kind of self-awareness, well, first off, it can make you very self-conscious.
Yeah.
And it might even feel a little bit, what's the word? I'm struggling for the word now. Narcissistic?
Very uneasy.
Narcissistic, vain, whatever you want to call it, overly self-absorbed. It's not. You're figuring out a message that you're communicating to other people, and you have to experiment with that to get it right. And a lot of getting good at this means practicing. And it's boring and it's simplistic. And it's exactly what you do. It's the reason why a soccer player dribbles a ball up and down a pitch ad nauseum. That is the most basic activity they can do, and they have to practice it to get good and to stay good. So if you want to get good on camera, you need to open up a Zoom meeting with yourself, watch yourself while you talk, figure out how you gesture in the space, learn how to make the eye contact with the camera, and you have to practice that repeatedly. If you want to get good at conversations, you need to think about those conversations in advance. You need to pull yourself out of your head when you're actually in a meeting and say, okay, am I giving off the impression that I want? Am I speaking too quickly? Am I getting distracted by my device? You have to check in with yourself over and over and over. And eventually it becomes habit. With companies wanting to start, one thing I recommend is set those base level expectations of how people turn up, how they're expected to be. It doesn't need to be draconian. You can leave a ton of room for self-expression in there. But things like stating in the meeting invitation, this is a jackets on meeting. If it's in person, come in your business jacket. Good. Or this is a cameras on meeting. If it's video camera, come with your camera on. We expect to see you.
So you specify that in a meeting.
Expectations. Sorry,
you set those expectations in a meeting invite. You set that up in a meeting invite, what you're saying.
Yeah. You tell people in advance. You'll leave the guesswork out of it. Tell everyone how to turn up. Eventually, in terms of dress and everything else, it becomes part of the culture. And people will understand that. They might need to be told when they are onboarded, but after a little while, they'll understand the expectation. But things like, is the cameras on or cameras off? That needs to be set for every single meeting. And all you're doing is setting the expectation for how people should be presenting themselves.
Yeah, very interesting. I find that we've set that up, when as was the COVID hit, that everybody has to have a camera on. But now when you do a meeting with somebody and somebody doesn't have a camera, then everybody feels a little weird. How come the camera is not on? So it's you go through those different ups, different ups. So business leaders who also, not only building a teams, Lauren, I know they gotta interview, they gotta stay on all those meetings all the time. They got to work on themselves before they start helping the teams out, right? So there's a lot of work needs to be done on on themselves. They got to figure out the skill set, whatever they need to do. So how do they get help? How do they go about it? And how do they start working on themselves before? You mentioned that recording that's a critical piece. I think you can start record and start watching yourself, and you get a lot of feedback from yourself, right?
Oh yes, watching yourself is one of the hardest things to do. It's always awkward. No one likes how they sound. Most people, as soon as you look at yourself on camera, you see every weird thing that's going on with you at this moment. I mean, I still need to actively ignore my own image. I'm like, oh no, what's going on? So it's really difficult. It's really awkward, but it's very important that you do it. For business leaders, especially if they find themselves doing a lot of interviews, whether it's podcasts, radio, television, whatever, I recommend taking media training workshops. There's lots of them out there. There are phenomenal media trainers all over the place. If I can make a recommendation, Warren Weeks has a great online media training program. One of my mentors, Grant Ainsley, same thing. He's got programs available that train you to give the media interview, and that can also help you figure out the online interview skills as well. But getting those skills down is important. And the best way to do that is to get training.
Yeah. I tell my colleague business leaders, this is not an option anymore. You got to get better at it. Starting podcasts, like, what I do, I know that was one of the reasons I started. And I thought I'm going to learn how to start using a camera, how to start using some of those, discussions and all the technology. And I learned so much every discussion I have. Every time I learn something, people, talking to people like yourself, somebody's expert in industry, I take away more from every discussion that somebody else will. So, I've been learning. So I think that it takes a lot of time, it takes practice, but you can master you get better at the skill every time.
You can. Everyone can figure out how to do this. It is, what makes it difficult is that it's something that most people haven't had to think about, or they haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it. And then you're retraining communication habits that you've developed over a lifetime. That's what makes it hard. The skills themselves are not difficult.
Yeah.
When people say, well, how do you create such a welcoming and engaging presence on camera? And I say, literally, I make sure that I'm about 1.25 arms length away from my camera so that you can see me from sternum to head.
Gotcha.
So that I can gesture. Yeah. And then I look at the camera lens. They say, that's it? Like,
yeah.
Pretty much. And I emote a lot. Part of that is because when we are on camera, our expressions tend to get dampened down a bit, but I'm a very emotive person to begin with. That is something that I learned. A really great way of learning what to do is to look for good examples. So find a business leader that you've seen on camera, or you've seen give a speech, or whatever it is you're trying to do, see if you can catch them doing that same thing. I mean, there's a million clips you can find on YouTube, and then watch those videos of them and figure out what it is they're doing. Don't listen to the message so much. You know the message, you've probably watched it a few times, but pay attention to their mannerisms, their behaviors, their rate of speech, their nonverbal communication, and say, well, what's working for me and why? And then try to pinpoint those behaviors. Then try them on yourself. Yeah. Not because you are trying to turn yourself into a carbon copy of that leader that you admire, but because it gives you an example to follow. Performers do this all the time. We study other performers' styles. We study how they act. We study how they dance. We study what they do. And that's because it's an example for us. The great masters, the mark of a great master in art was, for a long time, how well could you copy the other great masters? Yeah. You learn technique that way, and it gives you something to go off of. So let's say that, who's a business leader that you admire, Gurmeet?
Mine is Grant Cardone. I'm a big fan of him, and I follow him all the time.
Great. So, Grant Cardone has loads of stuff, loads of videos online that you can watch. So maybe you're watching it and you're thinking, I've got a keynote speech coming up. I'm giving a talk at my industry conference. Okay. How does he walk on stage? And then you look and you pay attention. How does he stand? Yeah. And then you go into your bedroom or whatever, close the door so no one's watching, and you try that. And you look at yourself in the mirror and you try it out and you move around a little bit. Does this work on me? If it does, great, keep it. If it doesn't, that works for him, but not for me. What else is he doing? Mm-hmm. What's his speech? Again, like, what are his speaking mannerisms? Are those similar to mine? And then you try them out. And it takes a lot of rep, it takes several goes at it. You're not going to discover what works for you and what doesn't in one quick little tryout, but it's almost like trying on different clothes to see what suits you. And I find that when we look at people that we admire, we're picking up on those qualities and those characteristics that are very often strengths that we have, that we just need to bring out a little bit more. So frequently, if something works on someone where you say, oh, that speaker, that professional, every time they talk, it just does it for me, there's probably a lot of similarities between their style and your style. Gotcha. So it becomes a good example. And you also learn what doesn't work.
Yeah, but the feedback is very important, right? Whether you
Yes.
get, getting a feedback from a video you recorded for over yourself, or you're getting from Mirror, or you get some sort of somebody's expert at the subject, and they
Yeah.
give you feedback. But that feedback is very critical for you to get better at what you're doing, right?
Yes, and especially in the beginning, getting feedback from an objective third party is really helpful. It takes a lot of practice, and I would say just time, getting used to it, to be able to objectively evaluate your own performance. Because usually once we start looking at our own videos, we slip into just self-flagellation. We're kicking our own butts. We're not happy with anything we do. Everything is awful. But someone else watching it, someone who isn't inside our own heads watching it, says, I liked that. That worked. This could be different. Can you do more of this? I liked what you did there. Can you do more of it? I don't like, that was kind of weird. Can you stop fiddling with the remote or whatever? And they'll see things that you are unable to see, which could include flaws, but is more likely going to include strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll be able to flag those and say, do more of that.
Yeah.
And after a while, you learn how to be objective with yourself. It's almost like when you watch a video, you're watching a video of someone else.
Oh, and it's so easy to get a feedback, especially when we are online. Everybody's connecting. It's much easier to get a feedback instead of, we used to get in a person that, okay, I'm gonna go find a coach and I'm gonna work with the coach. But now it's much easier. We're just working on a Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I work with people literally all over the world, and they send me their videos. I have a look. We work on their mannerisms, and even when we're preparing for in person, you learn enough through this medium. Basically, if you get good on camera, you will also get good in person, and vice versa, I find. So there's someone out there for everyone. And if you want to find that feedback, there are plenty of communication professionals that will be able to break down what it is you're doing and help give you that guidance and that coaching. If you really want to dive in both feet and you have the flexibility in your schedule to do this, and this is where it gets trickier for leaders, I recommend to everyone improvisation theater courses.
Wow.
Or stand-up comedy.
Yeah, that's the challenge I heard. I heard a lot of a professional they've gone through. That's the toughest one. Stand up, not only you gotta be better communicator, but now you gotta know your stuff and you gotta be funny.
Yeah, and it's hard to be funny, right? It's
a lot of
it's tricky. And what I find is so powerful about using improvisation theater as well as stand-up comedy, but I think that improv has a little bit of an edge, is that it forces you to take risks with your communication. You have to be quick. You don't know if the joke is going to land. You don't know if the scene is going to work, but it doesn't matter. You have to try it. And particularly with improv theater, there's the physical element to it as well. So there's a lot of big body acting in improv theater, and that helps people loosen up and become more graceful, more expressive, but not clownish in their gestures. So it just packs everything into one really, really solid method of training, which again, difficult for a lot of business leaders to do because you have to find the time to do it. But for those of you who are really intrigued, give it a go. It'll be one of the scariest things you've ever done.
Yeah, I can imagine, and how much work you put into for every joke to perfect it. The tone of it and the pauses where you're gonna take a pauses. For every little joke, how much time, how much work you put into. I mean, if you put that much work in any presentation, you'll be very good at it.
That's the kind of work you should be putting into your presentations. That being said, you never want to memorize them. So it's like, and again, that's where the beauty of the improv comes in, is that there's less homework.
Yeah. Very interesting. So let's talk about your book, Unmute.
Yeah.
Very interesting book. A lot of information. You packed a lot of information. And so it looks like you published the book during this COVID time, right? It was a little bit before that.
I published it in, it came out in September 2021, or publication date June, something like that. It was available in September 2021. And it was written in response to my clients. Because that first, March 2020, when everything really started shutting down across North America, one thing I did, calendar was clear, as I started calling up my clients and saying, how are you adapting? How are things going? I know you're online, and I know it was kicking and screaming. And I just began doing training session after training session to help everyone get comfortable in this environment. And the book grew out of that. So it's a lot of fun. I do poke a lot of fun at the situation because it was ridiculous. But on the other hand, it's designed to, the book is written to get you to a high level of virtual communication and virtual performance with as little fuss and as quickly as possible. Because you don't need an elaborate setup to look really good on camera.
Yeah,
and you don't need to be a film trained actor to figure out how to make this work for you, to go from, you know, maybe a 2 out of 10 to a 7 or an 8 out of 10. It doesn't take a lot, but it does take specific knowledge of a few weird things that a lot of people just, again, it was never their job to know this, so they didn't know it. And I lay it out in the book and make it easy.
Yeah, and especially that, you know, some of the items you mentioned in books, you know, prepares you for some of the stress you're going to deal with, some of the challenges you're going to go through, right? So you just preparing yourself for those, you know, just being aware of those items when you're getting into those discussions. And, you know, we've gone through Zoom meetings one after another one. It definitely, you know, adds a lot of stress to your routine. You know, it's not that easy as you know, it looks like that. Okay, I'm going to turn a camera on. I'm going to be in front of it, but
it's not that easy. And, you know, I would say about half the book is how to get your stuff set up nicely and how to be good on camera. And about the other half is how to make it sustainable in the long term for yourself and your team. Because if you overdo this, you will burn out. And we all heard of Zoom fatigue or Zoom burnout or whatever it is you want to call it during the pandemic itself, but it is still a problem. And part of that is because we think we should be able to do this throughout the day, and understanding how to do it in a way that's productive and healthy. It's not as straightforward as, you know, just turn the computer off at the end of the day. There's an element of understanding what is going on in our brains when we're using this environment, what is going on when we're toggling between 2 or 3 different screens and still trying to manage the conversation and make the conversation flow and work. Everything is harder when you put it on camera. Everything is just that little bit harder, and that piles up. So I feel it's important for leaders to understand that additional load that people are under, and that they are under too. Because I will say right now that whenever I polled my audiences or my clients, how many hours a week are you spending on camera? It was the people at the top who were spending the most hours and who were usually the most burned out. So they need to understand for themselves as well how to make this work in the long term.
Yeah. So were you finding some of the, you know, what they're using to find the balance or find that, you know, reduce the stress? Where is some of the activity you see that people are, you know, taking on? Hey, listen, you know, maybe I gotta cut down some meetings, or maybe you gotta do some in person. Where you see some of those techniques are used to find a balance or reduce some of the stress?
For those organizations that are able, bringing people back into the office at least a couple of days a week has made a big difference.
So
made a really big difference. And I run my own business. I've been in my home office for a long time. I absolutely advocate that if you can get people together, doesn't need to be all week. I wouldn't do that anymore either. But at least a couple times a week, it's good to get people together to have those more free-flowing conversations. But other tactics that have worked really well have been to set up blackout days where there are no meetings. There's no meetings, and if there are meetings, they are not on camera. So I like to say that cameras off Friday is the new casual Friday. So set a day a week where if you have meetings, all of them are off camera, and that's standard. I also recommend, and the organizations I've worked with that have implemented these have found really good results, that you set up blackout periods where there is no interruption to people's work. Now, the way that you set blackout periods is going to vary depending on different people's job functions and the demands, but particularly for those people, and it's usually the leaders who need to have time for deep work, blacking out 2 hours once or twice a week where there are no interruptions so that they can get their head into that deep work is very, very good. I think that people should have ideally an hour and a half a day where they are working, they're doing their thing, but there's no calls, there's no meetings, there's no video conferences, there's no interruptions, there's no knocks at their door, no interruptions. That really reduces the stress, because now what you aren't doing is ping-ponging in between all these different tasks and all these different things that are coming up. That's really fatiguing, to have to be yanked from your attention, getting yanked from one thing to another. And the blackout periods fix that for both in person and online.
Yeah, no, that's very critical. My time blackout out is very, very early in the morning. So, I find somewhere from 6 to 8, those 2 hours, nobody bothers me, right? So, but whatever works for you, if afternoon works for you, you got to find that time. I think that's very, you can do a lot more work. Sometimes I do more work in those 2 hours that I would do rest of the day.
Yeah, because you can
just
focus.
That critical.
You can hit the flow state. Another thing that's really nice to do, I think, after any meeting, but particularly after virtual meetings, is instead of blocking in 15-minute chunks between the meetings, I recommend 30. And I call these transition times. So once a virtual meeting shuts down, 30 minutes gives you time to quickly do any email follow-ups immediately, send me that thing, schedule this follow-up. You can do that as soon as the meeting closes down while it's still fresh in your mind. And that then leaves you time to get up, stretch, get a coffee, make yourself comfortable, step away from the computer, and then come back and prep for the next thing. 15 minutes does not leave you enough time to do that. So you get people then trying to follow up. They never take any breaks. They never get away from their computer because they're slamming from meeting to meeting to meeting. The 30-minute chunk of time shows up as a block in your calendar. So it's easier to respect it when it's a full chunk that you can visibly, that's really visible, that you can see. That makes it easier to follow along, to follow it, and not let it just get frittered away as our breaks so often do.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think definitely that gives you a little bit of time in between the meetings as well. One thing I find work for me, Lauren, is I go through my schedule in the morning, and if I find that my staff only needs some sort of directions from me, some sort of information from me, there's nothing I need it back, I can record a quick video just on those 2 hours and send it to them, and it's in the inbox, and they can watch it. I don't need a meeting for that. They can watch it whenever they have a time, and then they can follow it. So my staff knows, they know to watch, get so many videos from me in the morning. For me, it's much easier. I can just record a quicker videos. Okay, this is what we need to do, and you can watch whenever you can.
Yeah, I love. What tool do you use for that? I've used Loom for that before. What's your favorite?
I just use Zoom or sometimes Microsoft Teams, either one of them. So we are on those tools. So anything that they need information from me, I'll just hit the record button and record it and send it to them, and they can watch whenever they can.
Yeah, that is such a great recommendation. And a nice thing about recording videos like that, instead of sending out emails, is for many people, when we send out emails, we tend to get a little bit wordy in them, and they can take a long time to write. Videos, you get the message out, it's as if you were speaking to them. So the expressions tend to be simpler, a little more natural, and it can really reduce the amount of time that it takes you to create the communication to send out to them. So I love that process on your end. That's wonderful.
Yeah, no, I mean, anything more than 5 lines, it records a video. It's much easier to communicate that way, right? It made everybody's life much easier. So you can get that really the message instead of misinterpretation in the emails. Very interesting. So how do you connect with the people? If people looking, they want to build a communication strategy, a lot of business leaders, I know it's early on a year, they are looking to build their communication strategies. They want to put something on a paper. Hey, listen, this is what I'm trying to accomplish this year. We do that sometime as well, build a strategy. We've been, saying we're going to communicate this effectively to clients. We measure that, sometimes simply saying, hey, we want to make sure the message is clear. So there's no follow-ups. If there's a follow-up, we think we failed on something, communicating properly. So how do you help people? Like how does people go about it, building those kind of communication strategies?
Well, I do work with organizations directly, of course, to build up those communication strategies and those communication practices. And again, as I've said before, I favor simple, practical, straightforward. techniques with as little technological intervention as possible. And that's coming from someone who practically lives online. So in terms of if people are interested in working with me to build those strategies or do the training needed to get people communicating in a more fluid way, then laurensergy.com. That's my website. My contact info is all over there. It's easy to find me. But I also produce a fair number of videos with communication strategies.
A lot of videos. Yeah, I saw.
Yeah, lots of videos. They're either on my blog or you can look me up on YouTube, Lauren Sergy, and you'll go right to the channel that's there. But the big thing is whatever you try, get as many people on board as you possibly can. Get everyone doing the same sort of strategy. They can still put their individuality will still show up as they communicate. But when you build that consistency of communication, the consistency of expectations, the etiquette, all of that, then it's one less thing for people to need to think about. They know how it's supposed to go. Everyone is communicating the same way. It becomes a consistent experience, and that takes away a lot of the stress.
Yeah, we talk about brand building. We can put information all over the website, but what would be better brand building that all the team members speak in the same language, they speak in the same way with the same tone, the same attitude. I think that there's no bigger brand than that. If you can get everybody in same communication level, that when you talk to customers, that's a much bigger brand than you could build that sending some information out.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always more power when you can hear something coming from someone that you feel like you can connect with than just receiving a mail out or an email or being directed to a website. Anytime that you can actually get that interaction going, it's going to increase the brand. And again, too, as you work on creating that consistent experience and figuring out the etiquette, and people do this work, they're also going to figure out their style. And that's when you can say, you know what, this client would be a better, if you were looking at onboarding a new client and figuring out who in the account management team should get them, then you can start saying, this client, Sarah probably isn't the right flavor for them. I don't think their styles will match up, but they will likely work really well with Andrew. It's just, I get the idea. Andrew's very outgoing. He's very gregarious. He cracks a lot of jokes. Let's send them to Andrew. I think that'll be the better fit. This other person who's just nothing but business, they want to cut to the chase, they no chit chat, send them to Sarah. Yeah, because she has that style. And then you can start matching up your clients with your people for who's there, because everyone's developed their style and you can recognize people's communication strengths. Wow. But there is still that underpinning consistency in how they show up, how they set up, how they communicate the brand, all of that. So there's individuality within the consistency. And that's a really, really powerful tool for any brand.
That's a great insight. Once you build that communication base, ground level, and then you can pick style. That's a great insight. I think that's a lot of work.
Who to send them to.
That's a lot of work, but I think it's worth getting to the point where you have people with the different styles and their styles as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Like when in many years ago, in an organization that I worked with, if you had someone who was really upset, send them to Brian. Brian deals with the upset people because he was so mellow and even keeled, but still when he spoke, it was very warm, but you could never make him upset. Yeah. So he was perfect for those people that were a little more fiery or needed that little extra calming down. You sent them to Brian. On the other hand, if they needed hyping up and they needed to get excited, they would send them to me because that's what I was good at. Yeah. So you figure that out with your people.
Very interesting. So let's talk about your journey, Lauren. How do you get so good at that? If you walk us through your journey, why communication and the public speaking?
I was the world's worst librarian. Okay. Still have a very, very fond heart for the library sector, but in the end, it just wasn't the right fit. But while I was in libraries, and I always worked on the back end, I did a ton of staff training. I did a lot of liaising with member organizations, a lot of work with external stakeholders, just not with the public. Okay. And when I was doing all that work, I started getting requests from member organizations and other libraries and stuff saying, hey, never thought that you could make this topic interesting. Can you come in and teach us how to present like that? Okay. And I have a background in acting and in communication and in English and in rhetoric and all of this sort of stuff. And of course, my library sciences background, which is all about understanding human communication and information needs. Okay. With all of that, I had systematized the way that I created presentations. Mm-hmm. So yeah, of course I can do this. And then it occurred to me, if a whole bunch of librarians want this, I'm willing to bet that there's non-librarians who want this too.
Yeah.
And I hung out my shingle and it grew from there. And as I continued working in sort of in the library environment, part of what I began doing a lot of was just helping especially senior leaders figure out how to communicate better. So it got around that I was good at helping people figure out their message, clarify the way that they spoke, learn better communication styles, communicate better with difficult people. And that became more and more and more of my role. And then finally I said, this is a full-on business. Mm-hmm. It all knits together. And that's how the business started. And that's how it's been going.
Wow, very interesting.
Yeah,
very interesting. We all find a way, how and it leads to the business, but, we all go through discovery and find out, hey, this is what I'm good at. So, you're passionate about it,
Listen to what people keep coming to you for. Yeah. Listen to what they keep asking you to help them do, because you're probably really good at it.
Yeah. Very interesting. So I'm going to include a link to our website as well. Where can people connect with you? Where can they find a book?
Yep. Everything is on my website, laurensergy.com. Okay. It's pretty straightforward and easy to navigate. So whatever you could possibly need from me, it's on there. And of course, you're always welcome to send me an email, lauren@laurensergy.com. I love talking about this stuff, so I'm very responsive.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to include all the links below the video as well. But before we go, I want to thank you for your time. I learned so much from you. I know I definitely encourage all business leaders to get a copy of the book and reach out to you for conversation. I learned so much. I'm sure everybody's going to learn having a discussion with you. Who knows where it can lead to? So, business leaders are watching. We all got to be on top of our games. So much changes, but if you're not working on your communication, I think you're missing out something. You gotta, this is an area where work never stops. It's for forever going work. You always gotta be better at communicating. Yeah. So, connect with you, have a discussion, see where that leads to you. But thank you so much for time. I learned so much from your discussion. I look forward to our future discussions.
It was a pleasure, Gurmeet. Thank you.
Thank you.